So it says we are recording. So anyway, I suppose I'll welcome everyone back here to Home Cinema Club. We had a couple technical issues tonight. Hopefully this recording is going to go through okay. We look a little different because we're using a different technology right now. We're using Zoom that's powering all of your meetings everyone's doing everywhere. So we will be uploading this to Facebook later. We won't be able to get the live interaction in from folks here, but still really excited to have a conversation with Hannah and with Dustin from Lantern Cinema. So if you guys don't know Hannah and Dustin, Lantern puts on great live shows at Vaudeville Muse. They're doing an amazing podcast. So you should definitely check that out. But I want to let you guys introduce yourselves as well.
Oh, you've done an awesome job so far. Thanks for having us do this. So like you said, we're Hannah and Dustin. We're 2/3 of the Lantern crew. The other is our buddy Chris Biagini, who does the podcast with us. And essentially we do the things you already talked about. We do live screenings when we're able. We do the podcast, and we've been pushing that a little bit more since we've all been inside.
I think Hannah said that 30% of our content has came out within the last 3 weeks or whatever it is. So.
Yeah, we are rocking the quarantine content. So yeah, then our whole goal, just like you, is we like having conversations about film. We like learning more about movies, and we want to broaden the conversation locally about film.
And with the podcast, we try to strike a blend of having extremely informative film analysis in entertaining kind of way. Every now and then we have opportunities to have guests come on. We actually just secured another one we're pretty excited about. So more will be revealed in regards to that. But Ben, it's an absolute honor for you to ask us to come and do this. So our paths haven't crossed yet in this format. So it's exciting to finally get to do this.
That's true. We have not crossed in the live stream / podcast format. So, but we have crossed in real life back when real life was a thing. So,
yes.
Well, and I had mentioned previously, Ben introduced us to an amazing film that we had an opportunity to collaborate on, which was Phantom of the Paradise, which Ben came to us with this really crazy, nutty movie with this amazing film soundtrack, and it was just perfect for our rock and cinema series. So
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and again, I having never seen it projected and with an audience, it was so awesome to be able to see that at Vaudeville Muse with you guys. So thanks again for.
Well, I don't know if we told you.
Fun.
Yeah, it was so fun. I wanted to say this, but I don't know if you knew this, but another friend of our show, Ian, which I'm sure he's a friend of Des Moines Film Society as well, he has come to each subsequent Lantern screening, and the next one he came with a Death Records t-shirt. So it had some wings.
Man, now filing in the back of my head, get a Death Records t-shirt.
Yeah, it's cool.
Oh man, that's fantastic. So, so this week, invited you guys on to kind of join us. We're all through May. We're looking at these independent black and white 80s films that happen to be first films for these really interesting directors. So last week talked about Jim Jarmusch's Stranger Than Paradise, and really excited this week to talk with you guys about Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It. So again, I should mention our sponsor that kind of helped us come up with this, New Belgium. I'm drinking their 1985 Ranger IPA here. I'm on my second one because we've had some technical difficulties, so I've had more time.
I was wondering if it was a 3-beer technical difficulty or not.
Well, not yet, but we're just getting started. So, no, it's helping me not worry about the technical difficulties. So it's doing its job. But we appreciate the support from New Belgium, and we're enjoying kind of conversing about these films. So. To that end, I guess just to kind of kick things off, and I know we kind of talked about this a smidge beforehand, but just to get back to it, I think one of the things that excited both of us about this film is the fact that it is so kind of independent. And what were some of those elements that maybe jumped out to you guys about She's Gotta Have It?
I think before I said this to Dustin while we were watching it, there's just this idea of like almost being a student film. This is Spike Lee's first feature-length movie, and it's a little bit rough around the edges. And so for me, that's what was striking. It seems so vibrant and interesting, and even though it might not be perfect and polished, I think it had a really attractive quality in that way, because I mean, I'm naturally drawn to things that aren't as perfect. So like lo-fi music recordings and student films, that kind of thing.
I feel like the film has a certain folk art quality to it. It almost has a real handmade kind of aesthetic. And yes, as she points to the folk art painting in the back, as an artist, that's something that is incredibly inspiring for me. It's not so inspiring to go see Spider-Man in the theaters. It's exciting and it feels a little bit like a roller coaster, but seeing something on a smaller scale like this, I think both, you know, for me and Hannah, gives us that feeling of like, oh, we might be able to make something like this someday. Like it engages the excitement of the artist, I feel, in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I had mentioned before, but just to kind of reframe it for me, I and in those kind of music terms, I thought about that like first album from your favorite band, and especially a band that maybe would go on to really blow up and have the big kind of studio albums with the amazing production, and those would be really great. But sometimes that first album, you know, like maybe the lineup wasn't quite set yet, and so there was like, you know, one guy, you know, like the bass player or the drummer was like their good friend, but he just couldn't play at all. And so that was like a little bit of a hindrance. And, you know, maybe it was self-recorded and self-produced. And so it had like some shaggy edges, but like you could hear the sort of singularity of the voice, and you could hear all of those things that you were ultimately going to really love about this band still coming through. And that really stood out to me about She's Gotta Have It. Watching.
May I ask you, Ben, one question? One thing that I'm curious about for you, what was it that gave it that quality for you? What was something that stuck out as like, oh, this is definitely a first film?
Well, I mean, you know, in terms of I guess the sort of shaggy edge aspects of it, to me, it's all about the acting and the performances.
Yeah.
And I think several of those are just not real strong. And you know, and unfortunately, like kind of the lead performance is just not real. I just didn't have much engagement with her. I didn't really get a big read there, and I think some of that could be in the writing, but I think a lot of it was sort of in the performance. But in a lot of the characters too, you know, I felt like a lot of your kind of I mean, I did, you know, high school and college theater myself, so I'm not saying this like disparagingly, but it felt like kind of your, you know, college theater, you know, actors kind of doing their first film, and it had a little bit of that kind of stilted quality to some of the performances. You know, that said, in terms of like what comes through, just, I mean, he has such a, I mean, obviously his eye and the, you know, the visuals and the way that he incorporates music into it, you know, just, you know, unbelievable elements, and just the way his kind of fearlessness in terms of just like going for it, which I think are real hallmarks of Spike Lee films throughout his whole career. Those are some things to me that kind of felt like they were present here. I don't know, what were some of those things for you?
Well, you mentioned too before, I don't know how much of this we were able to catch, but you mentioned even just, you talked about unprofessional actors or non-professional actors, and then the music of Bill Lee. His dad provides the soundtrack, which he did for a few other films, but his sister Joie Lee is in it. It just seems like you know, a work of love and a work of family. So there's a lot of that. And I think I don't know, I mentioned before, there's just kind of a vibrancy to it where you can tell that people were, like Spike Lee was just having fun playing.
Oh, the labor of love quality comes off so strongly. It's one thing that Spike Lee always mentions in interviews is that the real cinema lover in his family was his mother. His dad, you guys, Bill Lee, who did the soundtrack for this, detested film. Is that funny? And specifically what he hated about it was, I mean, obviously it's portrayal of Black people. You know, he absolutely hated the way that it came off so fake. But his mom, as he said it, his mom always took him out to be her cinema date, essentially. So you also have a situation where Spike Lee's grandmother actually foot a lot of the bill for this film. So you're talking about these familial elements. but I think that's something that stands out. And Spike Lee in it is awesome. I think his performance in it is great.
Well, obviously that character persisted too. An advertisement for sneakers.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it is interesting because we don't think. I feel like today we don't really think of Spike Lee the actor so much, but I mean, he's the star of Do the Right Thing. He's plays a pretty big role in oh gosh, lost my train of thought. Anyway, he acted in many of his early films. It was quite good. Yeah, the Mars Blackman character, he of course continued in those Nike Michael Jordan commercials. I just rewatched those in the last few weeks because I've been watching the Michael Jordan documentary on ESPN.
Yeah.
Those are all fantastic. I mean, they're just every one of them is so good. So
let me ask you this, Ben or Hannah, I'm curious, for when the actor puts himself in the film, him or herself in the film, does it bother you guys or do you like it? I always like it.
I mean, like Alfred Hitchcock put himself in the film?
Yeah, or you talked about Woody Allen, or even when Martin Scorsese pops into his films.
I like it. I mean, if he could do as good a job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of times that I dislike it. But yeah, it does. It does. I mean, Hitchcock kind of does the pop in cameo, and Spike Lee, is more like Woody Allen, is more of like an actor. He's really in there playing a part and everything. So yeah, I think I like it. I think I mentioned Woody Allen too because for me, Manhattan was a movie that really jumped out to me on this rewatch. Both the black and white cinematography and especially at the end, there's some shots kind of down underneath the bridge down there that really harken to Manhattan. But I went back to and I looked at the opening of Manhattan is set to Rhapsody in Blue, and we get all these kind of just beauty shots really of like buildings and kind of things in Manhattan. Here it's a similar but very distinct opening here, and I was really taken away. In fact, even before we get to the credit sequence here, this film starts with a Zora Neale Hurston quote, and then we get 40 Acres and a Mule, his production company, and then we get a single card with a Spike Lee joint on it. That's a pretty confident, like, this is who I am from a first time filmmaker, and it really sets a template for like, hey, here's what to expect in this film. But then it goes into that opening title sequence, which is all still photographs of African Americans in Brooklyn primarily, I'm assuming, and most of them are kind of period photographs. Most of them look to me to be maybe more like 1940s, 1950s, not contemporary to this film, all set to this real kind of beautiful, a little bit more melancholy score that his father composed. And so like watching that with Manhattan, it was just interesting to kind of see those two very much both about this place. But, Woody Allen's New York City is quite a bit different from Spike Lee's New York City. And that's clear just from those, opening montages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's kind of that love letter to Manhattan. I mean, obviously it's the title of the movie. It's the character in and of itself. Yeah. And then you have a love letter to Brooklyn, which, I mean, this is like Rotten Apple period New York City. It was not considered to be a beautiful or nice place to live, but he shoots it so beautifully, and he includes so many nice human details that, I mean, I think this movie did actually encourage people to move to Brooklyn. Some people even blame Spike Lee for gentrification, but that's obviously.
Well, he himself even admits now that version of Brooklyn that exists in the film no longer exists.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And by many years ago, that it doesn't exist now at this point. Yeah. But also, I think the score itself, I think the inclusion of all of the jazz music, and specifically, it's not like a real like peppy, but it's not necessarily that. It's like this really introspective. Mm-hmm. It gives your mind a chance to feel melancholy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dustin, you had mentioned in addition to Woody Allen, you had also mentioned Cassavetes, and could you talk more about that, because I thought that was a great comparison as well.
Yeah, so me and Hannah are big Cassavetes fans. Sounds like you are as well. Well, one of the first things I said to Hannah as we were watching it, I'm like, this movie reminds me so much of Cassavetes' debut, which was Shadows. The look of it, once again, it's a black and white movie. It's kind of shot in a way that has this real kind of earthy quality to it, where it feels like, oh, you could just walk inside of your screen to be a part of this film. But also, that movie is also about social issues. But this one seems a lot more real, I would say, probably than Shadows. Because doesn't Shadows have that main character, which, yeah, essentially in blackface, right?
If that, I think she's just a white woman who.
No, the protagonist, the male protagonist, I think, in that
That's right.
they
Yeah,
affected
yeah.
him so he looked like he was actually.
Yeah.
Whereas like the rest of the cast are black
Yeah.
actors, so yeah.
Yeah,
But it has that similar kind of debut film quality to it.
oh yeah, I agree. And just a real gritty shot in real locations in New York City, kind of. Yeah, absolutely. I think
Similar soundtrack choices, I feel.
But I do love that like Spike Lee kind of overexposed, like almost grainy look, versus like a really smooth Manhattan kind of black and white. It's really.
Well, yeah, and it also reminds me, you were talking at the beginning how it almost has a feeling of a college production. This film almost kind of feels like a play. It seems like one of those films that's kind of done in a chamber piece kind of setting. It's a lot of the main characters looking dead on at the camera and delivering, somewhat lengthy monologues. And similar to another Woody Allen film, I kept saying this to Hannah, it reminded me not too far off from Annie Hall, where it kind of plays with what a structure of a film can do.
Breaking the fourth wall and having.
It's obvious from watching it that Spike Lee had seen a lot of films by this point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because it has that, like, it starts with sort of that like mockumentary format with the like direct to camera, and we even get the characters' names on screen, like it's going to be like a documentary about this this woman who has these kind of multiple male lovers at the same time. But it kind of that format kind of comes and goes. It's not really, they doesn't really carry that through all the way. So one of the questions we got before we had to jump off the other thing, we were just kind of starting to get into it, but I don't think we really got to hear each other's responses on that. Clinton brought up the question about the sequence and color, and there's this one sequence in the film. It's mostly a dance sequence that goes into color, and there's even some kind of heels clicking. Clinton wondered if, for him, it suggested the Wizard of Oz from the heel clicking and obviously the jump to color. But I think actually right as we got cut off, Dustin, you were starting to say kind of what you thought of that sequence.
Yeah, well, certainly the Wizard of Oz, I don't think you could see something, close your eyes and click your heels and not think of Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz, and then to have it go to color, it's almost like a punch in the face with color all of a sudden. But I was thinking of a larger art movement that exists within opera. At one time, in much older operas, it used to be that in the middle of acts, they would actually separate the acts by having ballet dancers come up and dance to separate various acts. So I'm not entirely sure if Lee had that inspiration watching it, but the fact that he came from such cultured folks, you know what I mean? Like his dad being a composer, his mom was an intellectual of some type, wasn't she?
Ridiculously artistic.
Yeah, and then from further research, I did see that one of his biggest influences is 30s musicals. So it also had that quality kind of happening at the same time. Yeah, and I loved it though. Once that happens in a movie, it's just like, yes, let's see this. But what happens? It does seem to be a cutting off point in the story, correct?
A little bit. Well, and when I watched it too, so it initially you're in color. It's her birthday, and what's her name? I'm trying to remember. Is it
Nola?
Nola, yeah, it's Nola's birthday, and Jamie has taken her kind of to this park to celebrate her birthday, and he's kind of decorated this sort of like there's like almost like a statue in like a sort of stage area in front of it, and then these dancers perform, and so we do see Nola and Jamie there, and he kind of it says like, hey, it's her birthday or whatever, and then they go into it. But one thing that I thought was interesting as I was watching it is it never cuts away from the dancers to their reactions to it.
Yes.
But there was a point during the dancing where I actually started wondering, I was like, wait a minute, are they watching this, or is this just like a completely like just representative of their feelings in this moment. And then at the end it does go to them and they're applauding and they're talking about it. So it's like, okay, this was like an actual real thing that happened there. But it very much feels like it's a dance representing their relationship, and it just almost felt like it was a total, like we're kind of off the timeline now as we're watching it.
Well, and even as you're talking about it, it to me brings up the idea of like Herzog's ecstatic truth kind of, idea, where all of a sudden it just goes into the basic truth of the scene is whatever, the feeling is of this. So I had that feeling watching it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. um I don't know, other areas we haven't touched on that you stuck out to you guys. And
Well, I mean, I think you'd mentioned that Nola is kind of the character acting wise that you don't really connect with. Although I guess I didn't even realize there was a Netflix series based on this.
I didn't either. Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
just.
And I guess she makes a cameo in that. But I think in terms of just interpreting how her character develops, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's so in your face how they keep trying to show that, just because this woman is promiscuous, they take so many pains to show that she's a healthy, normal person, and that it's not because of her dad not loving her, like Mars speculates. And they, all these men around her have these opinions about how she is, and kind of that, that irony you see as the audience, where they judge her so harshly for having sex, but then obviously they're also takes two to tango, that kind of idea. So I think seeing this, especially because I mean there's the thing that's tough about watching this movie, obviously, is there is just a seemingly out of nowhere rape scene that Spike Lee's actually gone back and apologized for.
May I actually read his quote on that?
Yeah,
because it's fascinating what he had to say about it. So Spike Lee has said that if there's one thing that he could take back, this would be this particular rape scene. And I quote, "If I was able to have any do-overs, that would be it. It was just totally stupid. I was immature, I made light of rape, and that's the one thing I would take back. I was immature, and I hate that I did not view rape as the vile act that it is."
Yeah. So, and I think that his development of her character is not too far off from 2014 Spike Lee saying that. And I think that's something I appreciate, because typically, I think rape is a lot of times used to develop female characters just in kind of a lazy way. But I think his handling and his writing of that character was really interesting. Where a lot of characters seems a little shallow, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Nola as a character.
Well, and something else too, this film also gets thought of a lot in regards to the concept of male gaze, like this idea of the female character being told from the perspective of a male. How do you think it holds up in regards to that? Do you think he does a pretty good job of writing a female character?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think a lot of times the women in his movies are really well developed compared to others you might see. And
well, and the thing to me that saves it is the very end scene where she's looking at the camera and talking about that. What is it that she's saying at that point? Does anyone remember that better than me?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's the end of the film, and there's the rape, which is bad. Just is bad for a lot of reasons, and doesn't really seem to fit in story wise and anything either. But so even just like setting that aside, you're kind of in the midst of an end of the film where it seems like she's on your classic kind of like code era, like path to righteousness, where she's gonna right her ways and settle down with a man, and you're really like tracking in that direction at the end, and you're kind of wincing, you're kind of like, oh, are we going, this is where we're going. And you're like, this was 1986, and that wasn't code era, but it was still a while ago, and this is where they had to go. But yeah, then and it kind of gives you a sort of false resolution there, because there is a point where it's like she reaches out to Jamie, who's kind of the one of her three lovers, who's really wants to have like a pretty standard kind of monogamous relationship or marriage, with her, and has really been pushing for that. And it seems like she kind of ultimately is, there's a point where you think she's saying, yes, you're right, that's what I want to, But then there's this sharp cut to, and then it's back to that kind of interview scene of her, and she's basically like, yeah, that didn't last, that's not who I am. And she kind of basically reasserts herself in the same way that she did at the beginning of the film, which, yeah, it's that really, I think, saves the ending in a lot of ways from really just kind of going off the rails. That feels a lot better. Although I have to say, I also wondered, like, I wonder if this was like a reshoot because it's pretty. It's I just wonder if they
It's
tested.
abrupt.
Yeah, or not that they tested, not like this was in a they didn't take this down to multiplex in Orange County and bring in 100 strangers to watch it, but it doesn't quite feel like it fits, but yet it does feel like it's the right place that it ends up. So,
well, I think it's significant also that this was a film that was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress, which he has several of his films that's in that. So I'd be curious to know if this is one of the few debut films, or if
I
that's
mean, to be fair, aren't like all tweets saved by the library?
well, I suppose that's true. Yeah, maybe it's not.
way to bring it down, Hannah.
That's not right. No, but I will, for a movie from 1986, I was really impressed with how they came up with something. And this guy, it was like you mentioned right at the top, it's so different from those really polished commercial 80s movies that I think a lot of us are used to.
And were you guys familiar with that this film had a huge problem in getting rated because they just wanted to give it an X rating because of all of the sex scenes that exist within the film?
Mm-hmm.
Spike Lee feels that primarily what that actually meant was people weren't used to seeing Black people having sex on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I actually think the sex scenes are fairly interesting in this movie. It doesn't seem like it's really, I don't know, overblown or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, super normal. Just nice.
Yeah.
And I do think that the race of the characters, the fact that, the cast is Black, I think that's really significant too. And in terms of 80s significance, I think it introduced a more nuanced look at what a Black character could be in film in the 1980s.
Yeah. Well, there's one in here too that's you get a lot of belly button and nipple very close, and it reminded me a lot of the Ice Cube scene in Do the Right Thing. Like it was very, very similar both stylistically, and it suggests to me that Spike Lee's into belly buttons, but that's so
just gotta throw that out there. And,
yeah.
I think it's one of the most impressive debuts ever, though, don't you think? I mean, it's obviously a signpost of all the things that are to come.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that so much, you mentioned the those kind of student films where you start to see those little qualities that come up and become really significant later in their work. He's held to almost everything. I mean, it's down to the title of his production company and his focus on race, his focus on film history, references to Wizard of Oz, all those things come up so much.
And the fun credits at the end. What great closing credits.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. And that's something too I always think about with Spike Lee is, and I think he's, made a number of absolute masterpiece films, but the thing about Spike Lee to me is he's always interesting, even if the film doesn't maybe 100% work. So I think about a later work like Bamboozled. And I think like Bamboozled is, that movie doesn't all fit together. And there's some real kind of like rough edges there, but like, man, he went there. Like he, he was going for something. And like, I would way rather watch a film that's got that kind of voice and like went for something like that. And like, you know what, at the end of the day, maybe all the pieces didn't line up. That's interesting to me. And so that's one reason that, I can't think of any Spike Lee film that I've ever not had some level of enjoyment from, because even some of those that it doesn't all come together, like, there's always still something there. And when it really kind of fouls on all cylinders, like, Black Klansman or 25th Hour, or, of course, Do the Right Thing, etc. Like you're just like, whoa, this is.
Well, he really seems like a director that's just been robbed at the Oscars year after year. Isn't it crazy that he's one of those directors that still hasn't 100% been given his full due?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does, but I just put so little stock in.
Well, that's understandable.
In the Oscars, I don't know. I mean, Martin Scorsese didn't win until he won for what was the film he won? The Irish Gangster film.
Oh no.
Didn't he do really well with Hugo though? I feel like
He
that
won a
was
ton
one.
of stuff for Hugo, but I don't think
Are you
he.
talking about Gangs of New York? Oh no,
No,
you're
no,
talking about The
No.
Departed. The Departed.
no. The Departed. The Departed was the one he finally won for, which to me is like I didn't think was particularly good, but
It's okay. I mean, but there's a lot of. I mean, that's probably the best movie in the history of any film to have so many Boston accents happening at one
So
time.
many co-ops.
So many co-ops, co-opas.
yeah, yeah. Oh my god.
Well, he really raked up the Oscars for Hugo. I was gonna say.
Yeah. Well, let's back to Spike Lee for a
so there are
second.
people. I agree. It's kind of just if you look back at the history of the best films, how did that happen? Where did that come from?
I'll tell you what, that year that Black Klansman was up and he didn't win, he won the award for the most awesome director ever at one of those ceremonies. Did you watch him at all? Like throughout the entire thing, he had like his whole Prince outfit on, his whole purple suit, and
Oh
every interview that he was getting, he was just like on fire. It's so funny. I
yeah.
love his personality.
Yeah. Well, and then of course he lost because that and then didn't Green Book won Best Picture that
Yes.
year, right? Just like Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture instead of Do the Right Thing. So it's
Well,
like,
in the interview that I'm thinking of specifically, which I'll probably add on this show, is at the he's getting interviewed by some press person, and the guy's like, "Well, what did you think? Did you feel like you should have won?" And he's just like as stone faced as can be. He's like, "Listen, I think it's like I don't know." He made some sports analogy, and he's like, "The ref made a bad call," and then he just starts like jumping around and laughing. He's just got such a great energy.
no, absolutely. So we also we were going to talk about Deerskin.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
Oh yeah, Deerskin.
we transitioned. Did you guys watch Deerskin?
We watched Deerskin.
So for anybody who isn't aware, we are hosting a virtual cinema, which is a way for us to help premiere new films here while all the theaters are closed. So there are particularly independent films that are still releasing in this sort of virtual cinema format. So you can come to our website, DesMoinesFilm.org. We've got a virtual cinema link there. We've got films that typically they're playing for about 2 weeks. We're showing about 2 films at a time. So right now, just this last Friday, we premiered this film, this French film, Deerskin. And so you can still check it out there for the next almost 2 weeks still. Anyway, what did you guys think about Deerskin?
It's a bananas movie, yeah.
It was bananas. It was really interesting. I would highly encourage. I mean, it's worth watching. It's worth renting, especially because, I mean, we've rented Trolls 2 a couple times for our kids, and like the $20 you spend to watch that isn't necessarily going to small movie theaters, and this, obviously that's part of this distribution. But anyway, in terms of the movie itself, I definitely recommend watching it. It's not terribly long, but it's really interesting. It's packed full of weird. The logic of the movie, I think it's just sometimes movies are really good at creating this world in and of itself where the logic is its own and you're just kind of swept into that right away. This is definitely one of those films.
I kept saying to Hannah as we were watching it, I kept saying to her, this really feels like a film that we would have went to the Varsity Theater, had no idea what it was, and then just walked away like, wow, what was that all about? So,
Yeah.
Ben, we do have to say we thought of the Varsity Theater a lot as we watched it. So just saying that real quick.
Well, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, if we had the Varsity open and running at this point, I think this is definitely a film that would have been fun to program. This would be an amazing midnight movie.
Oh yeah. To me, one thing that I kept thinking of, we actually last night just watched another film. Have you ever seen the film One Cut of the Dead?
No, I haven't.
We don't necessarily need to get into the whole thing. It's awesome, but it's a film that's kind of about filmmaking. Kind of reminiscent of the documentary American Movie, which is also a film about the act of putting a film together.
Yeah.
I kept thinking this is like a surreal version of that.
So you have this guy who's obsessed with his new jacket.
Yes.
And to the point he communicates with that jacket, and he simultaneously is behaving like a filmmaker. He knows nothing about making movies.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see him try to educate himself and where, he's trying to create, but.
Well, we kept saying, we're like, what genre of film is this? I think we were having a hard time even putting a pin
it's
on
not
it.
that funny. It's not that dark. Well, it's pretty dark.
It's pretty dark. It gets there.
But it could be a little more, all that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I saw people make I think I would almost go absurdist, if I had a genre, and I certainly saw people make, Boonwell, comparisons. But I think it's mostly been described as, dark comedy or horror, and it's like, yeah, it's maybe somewhere kind of in between those. It's more, I'd say, just, dark, weird vibe kind of picture. So
yeah, it was cool to see Jean Dujardin do a role like that. Who I think of him in The Artist.
Exclusively.
Yeah, almost exclusively. So yeah, it's weird in a way that I really enjoyed.
I would agree with that.
It felt a little slower than its 80 minutes or whatever it was, but I think it's definitely worth watching.
This statement.
I don't want to give anything away, so I'm trying to be careful here.
This statement's not going to mean much, but maybe it'll mean something to somebody. It was one of those films, as you're watching it, you were like thinking like, oh, I bet this was made on a very shoestring budget. But then we kept joking like, oh, it probably still cost like $25 million to make or something. Yeah. What were your thoughts, Ben? I mean, you liked it?
Oh no, real similar to you guys. I mean, it's so deeply weird. I mean, it lays out a weird vibe right away. It's like this guy is obsessed with this jacket, and he buys this kind of just weird, like, old deerskin jacket that incidentally does not really fit him particularly well.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only person. That was a little short on him.
No, it was, but I feel like that was like part of it was just this whole kind of, his vision of what this meant to him was, completely divorced from, the reality of what this looked like. And then
killer style.
Yeah, killer style. And as you guys mentioned, then, he gets this video he purchases this jacket from somebody, and I'm giving kind of some plot synopsis here, I guess, to the extent that there's plot in this film. And the person he buys the jacket from also gives him this old kind of like DV tape camcorder, like a 98 era, like, camcorder kind of thing. And we do get a smidge of backstory. It seems like his marriage has just ended, basically, and he's kind of left wherever he lived with his wife and whatever his life was before that, and he rents a room in this hotel in kind of a small rural community in France. And then just sort of he's almost kind of trying to carve out a new identity for himself here, quite literally, as I'm the deerskin jacket guy. And then he's got this camera, and he sort of has a conversation in a bar where he just sort of almost seems like off the cuff just says, I'm a filmmaker, but then kind of runs with that and decides, yes, I am a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And of course, from there, the jacket starts talking to him, essentially, and he's having conversations with the jacket, and it goes from there. I love weird, and this movie definitely goes weird. The one kind of thing I would say is it's 77 minutes long, and there's not a lot of story beats that come kind of after the setup.
With you.
And so it didn't quite. It creates a very weird vibe and gives us this really kind of unusual character, and so it's very interesting to watch him there. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't ultimately kind of, I think the best version of this film would have then had maybe a couple of more kind of reveals or reversals or changes of direction that we didn't see coming. And this more just kind of continues in that same kind of, vibe, but it's a deeply weird vibe and pretty unique and interesting to hang out with for 77 minutes.
Well, and I think for me and Hannah, we both like weird as well. That's something we like, but sometimes weird for the sake of telling an interesting story. It's not that the story is not interesting, right, but I don't think the filmmaker necessarily had anything necessarily they were trying to say with it. A film that comes to mind with me is something like Punch Drunk Love, which kind of has like a weird kind of aesthetic to it. Like as you're watching it, you're like, oh, this is making me feel uncomfortable and strange at points. But I feel like some of the symbolism in Punch Drunk Love kind of works a little bit better or something.
Yeah, this one you basically symbol. Yeah.
And that's about it.
That's a really interesting comparison, actually, though, because I would say I think there are some ideas at play here, and to me, there were just some things about maybe toxic masculinity or kind of like midlife crisis, sort of, man trying to redefine himself, and this is sort of a kind of preposterous permutation of that. But much like Punch Drunk Love, really kind of has some of those same elements floating there. So that's a really interesting comparison to me. But yeah, I agree. I mean, whereas Punch Drunk Love, there's more of an arc there, and you kind of see that character maybe develop or change.
Well, and I think sometimes a truly great film or any, a great song or anything like that, you can almost say in a sentence what the film is about. And to me, Punch Drunk Love is about trying to find some kind of love or acceptance in the world. It's like any other, that story's been told a million ways. But Punch Drunk Love is the only version of it that I can think of that was told like that. I think this one is a little bit harder to give that one sentence appraisal of what this film is.
The bartender made that point about he thought his film was about, what was it, your layers of protection.
Which I liked, yeah.
Yeah, so things you show the outside world and everything.
Well, and I think
also, just can I interrupt really quickly
Yeah.
and bring it back to a very not intelligent question, but are we to believe that he spent 7,000 euros on that jacket?
Oh, I didn't pay attention. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
I'm glad you brought that back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not totally familiar with the current exchange rate, but that did sound like a lot for that particular. So.
He got a camcorder. So.
He did get a camcorder. Didn't come with the cassettes. That's the thing. I don't know if you could get those cassettes now, right?
Yeah.
Those are gone.
She seemed to be able to think she could get it. That town, it had to have whatever the French equivalent of like a Ben Franklin is. Like there was one of those in that town that still had like, DV tapes that to facilitate the film. So
it was perfect for an afternoon, though. It beat the pants off of Trolls 2. We've seen that about 1,000 times at this point. So just to see something that engaged the adult mind was much appreciated.
Yeah, I've watched Trolls 2 as well with my children. We have not watched the Scooby-Doo movie yet, but I feel
that's tomorrow for us.
Is it? Yeah, I feel like that could be a thing that happens here. So,
can I ask a kind of off-topic question?
Yeah.
What movies do you show your kids that you enjoy too, or to ensure that they have a broader taste in film?
Little cinephiles.
Does that make sense?
What's your cinephile seeds?
See, that's a good question.
Or do you do that at all?
I do, but I feel like it maybe starts a smidge older than kind of where your kids are and where my youngest is right now. Mm-hmm. So my 12-year-old, as he got to maybe like first, second grade, kind of like that, I feel like that was maybe where he first got into, some of those films. I know I took he and a friend to a Miyazaki film that was at Flicks.
Oh, but
they were in maybe like third grade, so that was, pretty cool. And now, and it's ramped up over time. And actually it's kind of exciting now. And while we're in like quarantine too, he's really developed an interest in like broadening his kind of film knowledge. So even before quarantine started, maybe back in January or February, he kind of came up to us and was like, what are like Hitchcock movies like? I kind of want to see some Hitchcock movies. So, we watched a bunch of Hitchcock movies, and we watched The Godfather last week. And so he's got a list of kind of a like 100 greatest movies list that he's sort of like working off of and trying to make his way through. So, but it's interesting, even that, we're trying, and so he's going into 8th grade, so he's much older and he's able to, kind of handle some of this stuff. But even then, like he wants to see Citizen Kane, and I'm kind of like, absolutely great movie, but I'm like, that movie's kind of slow, and like kind of like, I don't know, you're kind of like, or I know he wants to see 2001, and I want to show him 2001, but I'm like, I don't know, man, are you to like just like relax your mind and let that experience happen? And so so I don't know, it's a good question. Have you tried any with yours that have maybe then not.
Well, we have our kids. I mean, you referenced, we told you earlier, they're 5 and 2, so it's a little more limited. But who was it that talked about Wizard of Oz? They said that the way to
Well, Patrick was just talking about Wizard of Oz, but it
no,
wasn't
not
him.
him. There was some filmmaker you told me about once who
I forget.
wanted to make sure his daughter was into good movies, and so he showed her Wizard of Oz. So, but you know, our kids actually do like stuff like that. We try to find, just at this point, it's all about any media that has longer than 8-minute episodes.
Yeah.
Well, I think for our daughter too, like our daughter is someone who's really interested in Halloween. She's always had like a huge interest in all that stuff. So I think one of the first films that made a lasting impact on her, you said Wizard of Oz for sure, but it has that spooky element to it, right? So there's the Wicked Witch of the West. Our daughter really loved Nightmare Before Christmas. And from there, I kind of thought, well, she's kind of into this spooky thing. So
Mad Monster.
yeah, Mad Monster Party, the Rankin and Bass Halloween special. But then from there, she kind of like she'll watch Frankenstein from the 30s, and she likes some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
She loves Fantastic Mr. Fox,
The Black Cat.
the Black Cat, Boris Karloff. Yeah,
I have no idea why she likes that, but she does.
Nice.
So we feel lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you guys are doing an amazing job. Fantastic Mr. Fox is a great one. That was definitely one that I showed my kids pretty early on. I know all the Muppet movies, which are nice transitional ones, I think too, because they're kind of like they're characters that they kind of know and like, but those movies are a little bit more sophisticated than some of the, kind of those kind of movies they see. Both my kids, Princess Bride is one of the earliest films that we shown them that is, they can still get into it because it's got those kind of fairy tale elements to it, but it's got a lot of humor and depth, stuff that we all kind of can enjoy as well. So
even I watched that movie obsessively when I was a kid, and I watched it without catching any of the irony. I didn't know it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek like parody of a genre.
Yeah.
So it's fun to grow with movies like that.
Same with Young Frankenstein for you, right? Isn't that another one where it's kind of similar?
That was.
Oh, you knew that was, well, of course, yeah. But another one that you liked.
Yeah.
Another good one, we watched Splash a few weeks ago.
Oh.
And I mean, that movie is so funny. And it's funny because I have a memory from college, because I remember seeing that movie when I was a little kid, and I thought it was great. And then I remember watching it like in my dorm room in college, and I was like, oh my God, there are so many like dirty jokes in this movie that like just had completely, when I'd seen it when I was a kid,
Oh, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
If you guys have had the experience of watching that as a child versus an adult,
oh yeah,
very different.
yeah. No, so I think those are all good kind of examples. But
I was curious. Yeah, we're all locked up in our houses here for a while. So
actually, before we end this segment, I did want to say this: our daughter, who was 1, Phoebe Moon, I showed her Magical Mystery Tour, the Beatles film. And man, we went through almost, like 4 months of her requesting to see that. There was something about just the raw music and the crazy like motions of the camera that she was just so attracted to.
Yeah. So. It's funny you say that. I've been meaning to show particularly actually I think Henry watched Hard Day's Night with us, but Hard Day's Night and Help, and Magical Mystery Tour is so kind of disjunct. I hadn't shown that one to him. Not like because he can't watch it or anything, but we hadn't watched that. But those Beatles are fun, especially when once your kids get into the Beatles music, and yours probably already are too. But I think once they know some of the songs and they kind of know, it's like the other things, like they know the characters a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we'd be remiss not to say Yellow Submarine. Obviously, that's another one if you want to. So
yeah. So awesome. We should do a second one of these. There's just all like movies to watch with your kids, right?
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Yeah, totally.
Parent movie podcast.
Yeah. These are good suggestions. So alrighty. Well, I don't know. Anything else you guys have seen lately, or anything else you guys wanted to mention, or we can.
If it's okay, I'd like to say this for our next. So this will go up tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll be able to get this all edited together, and we'll have a nice little crossover between Des Moines Film Society and Lantern Cinema,
which we always appreciate.
Yes, our next film that we're actually going to be breaking down is Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali. So we've been doing all the research for that, and another amazing debut film that we're excited to break down. So that'll go live next week as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that'll be exciting. That's a film I have not seen, so I would love to check that out. And
You should watch it with your son.
yeah. Oh, is it a good one to watch?
It's
No.
cripplingly sad. But if he wants to see like one of the world's great films, that's just like, wow, I've never seen anything like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, well, that'll be my sell. It'll be, well, you could play more Animal Crossing, or we could watch this film. It's cripplingly sad.
Very depressing black and white film from India.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go.
All right, awesome. Hey, thank you guys so much, especially with the technical challenges tonight.
Oh yeah, thanks for being so patient, and mostly thanks for inviting us. It was really fun.
And thanks for all you do for the film scene in
Yes.
Des Moines. We really appreciate that all these years.
Well, right back at you guys. So anyway, thank you, and thank you for everybody who ends up watching this. When we do get this uploaded to Facebook, and please follow Lantern Cinema, and obviously follow Des Moines Film Society as well. And we'll see everybody later. All right, bye-bye.
So long, everyone.